The sentence that made my hands go cold was not, "We're eliminating your role." It was what came 3 seconds after. Connor Whitfield slid the severance packet across the conference table, smiled like he was doing me a favor, and said, "Obviously the pricing engine stays here. It was built for Northcroft." I looked at the packet, then at him, then at the little green light on the speakerphone in the middle of conference room Birch, where HR had dialed in because apparently firing me in person was not considered sufficient efficiency. The air conditioner was blowing directly onto my left shoulder. I remember that because it was the only thing in that room that understood how cold that conversation actually was. I said, "No, it doesn't. My name is Elena Marquez. I was 41 years old when Connor Whitfield fired me, and I had been a senior data analyst at Northcroft Distribution for exactly 8 years, 3 months, and 11 days. Northcroft was a commercial supply company based outside Columbus, Ohio. We sold industrial fasteners, safety components, electrical fittings, and maintenance stock to manufacturers, hospitals, warehouse operators, and municipal buyers across the Midwest. It was not glamorous work. It was the kind of business built on thin margins, ugly spreadsheets, and sales reps promising things at 4:58 p.m. that finance had to untangle at 7:30 the next morning. That last part was where I came in. When I joined Northcroft, quote pricing was half guesswork and half panic. Reps would pull old bids, at whatever percentage felt competitive, and send out offers that looked confident right up until someone in finance realized we had just underpriced a 12-month contract by 6 points and effectively donated $250,000 to a hospital network in Indiana. In my 3rd year, I built the BidGuard exception dashboard, which flagged quotes that fell below historical floor margin, freight-adjusted cost, or vendor volatility thresholds. That alone cut below-floor quotes by 63% in 9 months. In my 5th year, I rebuilt our customer segmentation model and cleaned 8 years of transaction history by hand because the company kept saying a proper data warehouse was on the roadmap, which is corporate language for, "We would prefer you suffer quietly." That project reduced quote turnaround time from an average of 6 hours to 22 minutes. And in year 7, during lunch breaks, evenings, and more Saturdays than I care to count, I built the pricing algorithm Connor later referred to as obviously company property. The internal name was Margin Map. Tessa called it the thing that stops sales from lighting money on fire. Both descriptions were accurate. Margin Map took current vendor costs, shipping patterns, contract history, customer behavior, competitive pressure, seasonality, and win rate data and turned them into quote recommendations that made sense. In plain English, it told Northcroft when to push margin, when to protect a relationship, and when a salesperson was about to offer a very sincere discount that would quietly bleed the company for a year. In the first full year after I rolled it out, Northcroft's gross margin improved by 2.8 points on national accounts. That translated to $5.1 million in preserved annual margin. It also reduced manual repricing errors by 71%, cut same-day approval requests by 54%, and helped us retain a $9.4 million regional hospital contract that would have gone sideways if someone had kept guessing at commodity swings the way they used to. I built the tool because the company would not fund one. That part matters. I had asked for budget. More than once. On May 12th of the year before I was fired, I presented a software proposal for a third-party pricing engine. Too expensive, I was told. In July, I asked for 1 developer sprint from IT so I could prototype a lighter internal version. Not aligned with IT priorities, I was told. In August, I asked for a sandbox server. Security concern, I was told. So I built it myself. On my own laptop. On my lunch breaks. At my kitchen table after dinner. On Saturdays while my son was at basketball practice and my mother was napping in the room next to mine after her 2nd round of knee surgery. For 11 months, I ate yogurt and almonds at my desk with one hand and coded with the other. I used my own software licenses. My own cloud account. My own machine. When I tested new logic, I did it over lunch or at home or on PTO days I should have spent doing anything else. Northcroft got the outputs. The weekly pricing recommendations, the exception flags, the approval files, the the margin risk summaries. Northcroft did not get the engine. That distinction became very important very quickly. Connor Whitfield arrived in February with a title long enough to make insecure people feel important: Vice President of Commercial Transformation. He was 32, he was the CEO's son, and he had the very specific confidence of a man who had never been told, by anyone with authority, to sit down and learn something before speaking. His father, Owen Whitfield, liked to describe Connor as bringing a fresh lens to revenue strategy. What Connor actually brought was 3 expensive quarter zips, a watch that announced itself before he did, and the habit of using business school vocabulary the way children use seasoning, too much of it, on everything. The first time I met him, he walked into the pricing review wearing loafers on a slushy February morning and said, "I want to unlock more entrepreneurial elasticity in our discount posture." Tessa Nguyen, my pricing coordinator, kept her face perfectly still. Tessa was 29, frighteningly efficient, and had the gift of sounding polite while being privately appalled. After the meeting, she followed me into my office and said, "What is entrepreneurial elasticity?" "Nothing," I said. She nodded. That's what I thought. Connor's incompetence was not abstract. It was procedural, which is always more dangerous. In his second week, he asked why we had quote controls for freight volatility on overnight shipments. "Because freight isn't free," I said. He laughed. "No, I get that. I'm saying, why are we letting shipping distort the selling narrative?" "The selling narrative," I said, "does not pay carrier invoices." He smiled the way men smile when they believe disagreement from a woman is a branding issue. "You're very tactical, Elena. I'm trying to get us to think bigger." 3 days later, he told a room full of sales managers that Margin Map had unlocked itself after he pushed for more accountability in analytics. That was interesting because I had built the entire thing alone and he had been employed at Northcroft for 12 business days. Malcolm Price, Director of Strategic Sales, turned in his chair and looked at me across the conference room. Malcolm had been at Northcroft 15 years, had a voice like worn leather, and possessed zero talent for pretending something stupid was not stupid. After the meeting, he stopped by my desk. "He just took credit for your model," he said. "Yes. You going to say anything?" "Not yet." Malcolm leaned on the doorframe. "That boy has no idea what he's touching." "No," I said. "He doesn't." Connor kept touching things. He asked Tessa to loosen approval thresholds because, in his words, guardrails create emotional hesitation in the field. He asked me if the algorithm could be dialed toward growth before the April board packet. "It already optimizes for profitable growth," I said. He waved a hand. "Right, but more growth. Do you mean lower target margins?" "I mean smarter aggression. What number would you like instead of the one supported by our cost data?" That was the first time he stopped smiling at me. The public embarrassment happened in March. Northcroft held a quarterly operating review in a glass-walled room called Summit because companies love giving mountain names to rooms where bad decisions happen at sea level. The CEO was there. The CFO was there. Malcolm was there. I was there because Connor wanted analytics support for his presentation, by which he meant he wanted the person who knew where the numbers came from sitting quietly in case he clicked the wrong tab. He did click the wrong tab. Actually, to be fair, he clicked the right tab and then explained it wrong for 7 consecutive minutes. He pulled up Margin Map's customer risk output chart and told the room it was basically a dynamic demand heat map showing willingness to pay. It was not. It was a margin protection chart showing where aggressive discounting would turn a nominally attractive account into a low-yield contract with expensive service demands. In normal language, it was the chart that kept sales from winning work that was not worth having. Owen Whitfield asked, "So the green accounts are the ones where we should lean in?" Connor nodded. "Exactly. High elasticity. We can press volume." I said, "That's not what the green means." The room got quiet. Connor kept his hand on the clicker. "It's directionally what it means." "No," I said. "Green means stable retention at protected margin. Red means volume without profit. Yellow means cost-sensitive volatility." Malcolm looked down at the table. He was trying not to enjoy himself too visibly. Connor gave a small laugh. "Right. That's what I said." "No," I said. It isn't. Owen Whitfield looked from Connor to me and back again. The CFO made a note. Connor moved to the next slide too quickly, which told me he understood exactly how bad that had felt. That was when he started asking for source code. At first it was casual. Shoot me the backend logic when you get a chance. I'll need the full build structure for continuity. We should get this into institutional ownership. Those were his phrases. Not one of them involved a formal transfer agreement, IP review, or compensation discussion. Just the assumption that if he said continuity often enough, the legal facts would rearrange themselves out of politeness. I said, "You have the output files you need." He said, "I want the engine." I said, "Why?" He smiled. Visibility. That was the day I called my attorney. Her name was Naomi Bell. Employment and IP. Precise voice. No wasted adjectives. I had worked with her once before on a non-compete issue for a former coworker and kept her number because women in corporate environments learn to keep useful phone numbers the same way other people keep batteries and flashlights. I met her for coffee on April 9th at 7:15 in the morning before work. I brought printed emails, the budget denials, my build notes, timestamped commits from my personal repository, software receipts from my own card, calendar blocks marked lunch, home internet logs, a list of every request Connor had made for the source code and every answer I had given. She read for 20 minutes, then looked up and said, "Did you ever develop this on a company laptop?" "No." "Company server?" "No." "Company paid software?" "No." "Did your job description require you to build proprietary software outside your assigned tools?" "No." She nodded. "Good. Keep documenting. Don't transfer anything." So I did. I documented every conversation after that. Dates. Times. Wording. Who was in the room. What Connor asked for. What I said back. On April 21st, he told Malcolm in front of me, "We need less artisan analytics and more scalable assets." Artisan analytics. Malcolm said, "The artisan analytics made us $5 million last year." Connor adjusted his cuff and said, "Exactly. Which is why we need it centralized." Tessa messaged me 10 seconds later from 2 desks away. "Did he just call your code artisanal?" I typed back, "Apparently I am a small batch woman." She responded, "I hate him a lot." "You and half the building," I wrote. The firing happened on a Thursday at 12:13 p.m. Conference room birch. 3rd floor. Frosted glass. One fake plant in the corner. A carafe of coffee nobody had poured. HR on speaker because Lena from Human Capital was working from home, which I found efficient in a very specific corporate way. Connor was already seated when I walked in. Navy suit, sleeves a little too short, tie not too tight. He looked like money had dressed him from memory. He said, "Thanks for making time." That line is always useful. It suggests the person with the severance packet believes scheduling was the issue. I sat down. Lena's voice came through the speaker. "Elena, this meeting is to inform you that your position is being eliminated as part of a restructuring of analytics under the Commercial Transformation Office." I said, "Understood." Connor folded his hands. "We're moving toward a leaner model. Less dependency on individual contributors. More scalable processes." "Of course," I said. He slid the packet toward me. "You'll receive 8 weeks severance, contingent on the usual release language. IT access will be shut off at 2. We'll also need the pricing engine documentation and admin credentials by end of day so the business doesn't lose continuity." That was the moment. The line that made the room go still for me. I looked at him and said, "There are no company admin credentials." He blinked. "For margin map. It doesn't live on company systems." He frowned, as if I had answered in a dialect he found uncooperative. "It was built for company use. It was licensed for company use while I worked here." Lena stopped breathing on speakerphone. You could hear it. Connor gave a short laugh. "Elena, let's not make this adversarial." I picked up the severance packet. "That's up to you." He leaned forward. "Anything that drives core pricing is Northcroft property." "Have legal send that in writing," I said. There was a long pause. The HVAC clicked above us. Somewhere down the hall, a copier started up. Birch always ran too cold. I had mentioned that twice in facilities tickets over the years and nothing had happened, which felt on brand for the room. Connor tried one more time. Look, I'm trying to be practical. The company paid you to solve pricing. The company paid me to analyze data, I said. The company refused to fund a pricing engine. I built one anyway. Lena spoke up carefully. Elena, maybe we should continue any IP questions through counsel. That would be best, I said. Connor's jaw tightened. He had expected upset. He had expected bargaining. He had expected me to confuse authority with correctness. What he got was a woman who had already organized the folder on her lap by topic and date. I stood up. Anything else? He said, you can leave your badge with reception. I nodded once. Good luck. On the way back to my desk, Tessa looked up and knew immediately. Her eyes widened. No. Yes. She stood halfway out of her chair. He fired you? Yes. For what? Restructuring, I said. She looked past me toward the hallway, where Connor was still in Birch. He's an idiot. Probably not a sentence for email, I said. Malcolm came over from sales 5 minutes later. Tell me you gave him the code. I did not. He exhaled through his nose. Good. I packed one box. Notebook. Framed photo. Charger. The mug my son made in 8th grade that was technically not round but fully functional. Then I opened one final email draft on my personal phone and sent it to Naomi Bell. Subject line, terminated at 12:13. They asserted ownership verbally. By the time I hit the parking lot, she had already replied. Do not transfer, discuss, or assist outside counsel. Call me. What they didn't know is that I had been preparing for exactly this since April 9th. Not because I wanted a fight. Because Connor Whitfield had the habit, common in people who inherit titles, of assuming access and ownership were the same thing. They are not. They just sound similar when spoken confidently by someone in a quarter zip. Naomi had me build a chain. Every version of Margin Map was archived with personal timestamps. Every lunch break commit was logged. Every cloud invoice was in my name. Every software receipt was mine. We preserved my rejected budget requests so it was clear Northcroft had declined to build or buy its own tool. We preserved the emails where Connor asked for the engine after taking credit for its results. We preserved the fact that the company had outputs, reports, dashboards, and recommendations, but not the underlying code, not the model weights, not the tuning logic, not the exception scoring, and not the retraining scripts that updated recommendations every Monday at 5:40 a.m. That Monday run was important. Sales relied on it for weekly pricing refreshes across 14,200 active SKUs and 312 account-specific discount structures. Without it, Monday quotes reverted to manual review. Manual review meant delays. Delays meant sales reps improvising. Sales reps improvising meant Northcroft started donating margin in emotional support installments. I had also done one more thing. On April 17th, after Connor asked for full build visibility, I drafted a licensing framework with Naomi. Quietly. Just in case. 1-year commercial license. Defined usage. No ownership transfer. Annual fee. Audit rights. Late payment penalties. Standard, boring, devastating paperwork. Not a trap. A door. Whether Northcroft walked through it was up to them. 48 hours later, on Monday at 8:06 a.m., my phone lit up with Connor's name. I let it ring. He called again at 8:09. Then 8:14. Then he sent a text. Need to discuss pricing disruption ASAP. Weekly model push did not populate. Call me. I set the phone face down and finished my coffee. At 8:31, Malcolm called. I answered him. Elena. Morning, Malcolm. It didn't run. I assumed not. He lowered his voice. I could hear office noise behind him, people moving quickly, somebody saying Connor's name too loudly. They thought the Monday files were automated through SharePoint. They were delivered through SharePoint, I said. A pause. Jesus. How bad? He exhaled. Bad enough. We've got the Riverton Plastics renewal due at noon. 2.2 million annual. Tessa's trying to rebuild last week's logic from exported files and Connor's in the war room telling people to approximate the pricing posture. Approximate, I said. His word. I'm sure that's comforting. Malcolm went quiet for a second. You knew this would happen. I knew what depended on the engine, I said. He made a sound that could have been a laugh or a sigh. Can you help? Not without counsel. Right. Another pause. I had to ask. By 11:40, Connor texted again. We are prepared to offer short-term consulting compensation to stabilize the transition. Name a number for a 2-week engagement so we can keep customers whole. There is something very revealing about a man who fires you on Thursday and asks for emergency expertise on Monday before lunch. I forwarded the text to Naomi. She replied in under 3 minutes. Do not engage directly. I'll send notice. At 1:12 p.m., Tessa called from her personal phone. I answered on the second ring. He just approved the Riverton quote using a blended historical margin, she said, talking fast. He told Malcolm the model was being too conservative anyway. How blended? Last 2 quarters average, no freight correction, no commodity update, and he overrode the packaging surcharge because he said the customer relationship could absorb it. I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second. How much? We think they're under by about 480,000 if Riverton takes full volume. That's not a quote, I said. That's a donation. I know. In the background, I heard someone say, get Connor in here now. Tessa lowered her voice even further. Elena, it's getting ugly. How ugly? Riverton accepted in 22 minutes. I sat back in my chair. There it was. The first clean consequence. Not theoretical. Not eventual. Signed. Connor had wanted smarter aggression. He got a $480,000 margin hole before lunch. I said, document everything. I already am. Good. Then she said the part that changed the scale of the problem. And there's more. Of course there was. Northcroft's largest annual bid package for the quarter was scheduled to go out that evening to Stonemarch Health Systems, a hospital consortium with a $7.8 million book and extremely specific pricing tiers. Margin Map handled those tiers because there were too many moving parts for a human to do it quickly without making expensive mistakes. Connor had apparently told the executive team he could have a temporary rebuild ready by 4 p.m. Tessa said, very quietly, Elena, they have 3 analysts in a room trying to reverse engineer a year of your logic from exported PDFs. From PDFs, I said. Yes. That would have been funny in another setting. At 3:26 p.m., Naomi called. I've sent a formal letter to Northcroft, she said. It states clearly that your software was developed on personal equipment, on personal time, using your own paid tools, and that any attempt to access, copy, reconstruct, or represent ownership of the protected source code without agreement will be treated accordingly. Accordingly, I said. She also asked, Naomi continued, whether you would entertain a commercial licensing discussion. She, Owen Whitfield's general counsel. Connor is no longer handling it alone. I looked out my kitchen window at nothing in particular. So, it had moved upstairs. And? Naomi asked. And nothing yet. At 4:11, Malcolm called again. His voice was flatter this time. Less disbelief. More triage. They just postponed the Stonemarch bid submission. For how long? 24 hours. That won't help. I know. What happened? He gave a short, humorless laugh. Connor tried to explain to Owen why the model could be recreated from business rules. Owen asked him where the business rules were documented. Connor said embedded in the workflow. Owen asked where that was. Connor pointed at exported spreadsheets. I said nothing. Malcolm did. Everything's falling apart since you left. Through the phone I could hear the sales floor in the background. Too quiet in some places. Too loud in others. The sound an office makes when people are pretending not to panic. Then Malcolm added, and if they don't solve Stonemarch by tomorrow, Owen has to explain to the board why his son fired the woman protecting $5 million a year. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, have a better evening than Connor. Malcolm actually laughed at that. Briefly. Tired, but real. At 5:02 p.m., another text came in from Connor. This can still be handled constructively. We need to align on a bridge solution before leadership overreacts. Leadership overreacts. He had cost them $480,000 by lunchtime, delayed a $7.8 million bid by late afternoon, and was still speaking like the main risk in the situation was other people becoming emotional. I did not answer. At 5:47, Tessa sent one final message. Owen just came out of the board prep room. Connor said he could rebuild your model overnight. Owen asked, with what? No one said anything. Then she sent a second one. Stonemarch moved the deadline to 9 a.m. tomorrow. If they miss it, we lose the bid entirely. I looked at the time. 5:47 p.m. on a Monday. 3 days after Connor told me the pricing engine obviously stayed with Northcroft. 9 hours before the company would learn, in the most public way possible, the difference between using something and owning it. 9 hours turned out to be more than enough time for Connor Whitfield to make the situation worse. Northcroft missed the Stonemarch deadline at 9 o'clock the next morning. Not by a little. Not by a formatting issue. They missed it completely. Tessa called me at 9:17 from her car. I could hear her blinker. They sent a partial file at 8:52, she said. Wrong tier structure, wrong freight assumptions, no service level adjustment, and one of the hospital groups was duplicated under the same parent code. I said, so they sent nonsense. They sent expensive nonsense. And Stonemarch. They rejected the bid package. Procurement said they won't reopen this cycle. I looked at the clock on my kitchen wall and thought about the line Connor had used in Birch. Obviously, the pricing engine stays here. What stayed there, apparently, was a great deal of confidence and very little else. Tessa continued. Connor got on the call and told them we were in the middle of a system modernization and the model outputs were being recalibrated. Please tell me he didn't say recalibrated. He said recalibrated twice. And what did procurement say? Her voice flattened. They said if your pricing methodology is unstable, your service promises probably are too. There it was. The second failure. Different shape. Same cause. The first problem had been technical. The engine did not run because the engine was not theirs. The second was relational. A $7.8 million hospital consortium decided Northcroft was not reliable enough to trust with the next cycle. You can survive a bad spreadsheet. What you do not survive easily is a client deciding your adults are not in the building. By the end of the second week, the damage had moved through sales, finance, legal, and the executive floor with the quiet efficiency of something inevitable. The sales team was working quote reviews manually, which meant every request took 4 times longer and still came out worse. 3 regional reps started bypassing the approval process entirely and using old templates, which would have been reckless on a good day and was borderline performance art under active margin pressure. Malcolm spent most of that week walking from desk to desk undoing other people's enthusiasm. Finance had its own problem. Northcroft's quarterly forecast depended on margin assumptions that Margin Map updated every Monday. Without those refreshes, the CFO's team could not tell which accounts were truly healthy, which contracts were drifting, and which wins were actually disguised losses. That meant the board packet for the month was suddenly built on stale assumptions and exported summaries no one fully understood. Connor, naturally, attempted to solve that with a presentation. Owen called an executive review that Friday in Summit. Same glass walls. Same clicker. Same mistake, only this time with an audience that had stopped extending him the courtesy of optimism. Tessa was in the room because Connor wanted someone from pricing there. Malcolm was there because sales was now attached to the problem whether they liked it or not. I was not there, which did not prevent Connor from talking about my work incorrectly for 20 straight minutes. I know because Malcolm called me from the parking garage afterward and, for once, he sounded tired enough to skip sarcasm. He told the board-adjacent finance committee we had 90% functional continuity. 90% of what? I asked. Exactly. Owen asked him to define functional continuity. Connor said the model logic had been sufficiently socialized. I closed my eyes for a second. Socialized. Then he said rebuilding it was basically a matter of reassembling business instincts from reporting outputs. Business instincts, I repeated. Malcolm gave a short laugh that had no joy in it. Owen asked him if instincts came with source code. That must have been clarifying. It got better, he said. Connor tried to walk through a manual pricing sheet to prove the team could operate without the engine. Except he used vendor cost from an old pull, forgot the freight escalator, and inverted the retention modifier. In front of everyone? In front of everyone. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a room when incompetence stops being private. Malcolm described it very well. Nobody interrupted him at first, he said. You know that moment when people are waiting to see if the person is going to save himself? Yes. He didn't. Owen stopped the meeting mid-slide. Not after. Mid-slide. He asked Connor one question. Did you actually understand the asset you claimed we owned? Malcolm said you could have heard the HVAC. Connor answered, at a strategic level, yes. Strategic level. Malcolm let that hang for a second and then said, it did not improve the room. That same afternoon, legal moved from interested to alarmed. Naomi called me at 4:06. Northcroft's general counsel has changed tone, she said. In what direction? In the direction of understanding that their internal statements about ownership may now be discoverable if this gets ugly. That was the regulatory piece. Not OSHA. Not inspectors. Just the kind of corporate problem executives actually fear. A paper trail that reveals they represented control over an asset they did not own, while using it to support pricing decisions, board materials, and customer commitments. Naomi continued, they want to know whether you'd consider an exclusive transfer. No. I assumed that would be your answer. It's also the short version. She made a small sound that, with Naomi, counted as amusement. I'll communicate the longer version. By Monday of the second week, Riverton Plastics had reviewed the contract Connor approved with his blended historical margin approach and done exactly what rational buyers do when they receive a deeply underpriced offer. They signed it and asked for an expansion option. The expansion option pushed the potential exposure from $480,000 to just over $710,000 if Northcroft honored the volume band. Finance noticed. Loudly. At 10:14 a.m., Malcolm called again. They're trying to argue mutual mistake, he said. With Riverton? Connor floated it. And how did that go? Riverton asked whether Northcroft commonly signs contracts it doesn't mean. Then they copied their counsel. I stood up and went to the window. Not because I needed the view. Because some conversations require you to physically relocate, even if it changes nothing. So now legal is involved twice, I said. Legal is involved in ways that look expensive. That afternoon, Tessa sent me a screenshot from her personal phone. No sensitive client data. Just an internal message Connor had blasted to half the commercial team. Until further notice, pricing recommendations may be approximated using recent win rate posture and managerial intuition. Managerial intuition. I read it twice and forwarded it to Naomi without commentary. 3 minutes later she responded. Save everything. By Wednesday, the backlog hit 386 quotes. By Thursday, 2 regional managers were openly refusing to send out manual pricing without written approval from finance, which meant deals were stalling in the field and sales reps were starting to panic in increasingly creative ways. One of them apparently called Malcolm at 6:12 in the morning and asked whether margin discipline was still the strategy or just a temporary vibe. Malcolm told me that line over the phone and I said, please tell me you wrote that down. I did. I may frame it. The bigger rupture came from Tessa. Connor had been leaning on her for days by then. Asking her to recreate logic from output files. Asking her to certify pricing sheets she had not built. Telling other people she was close to operationalizing a bridge model, which was a very polished way of saying he kept volunteering her for work that could not be done. On Thursday afternoon, he sent her a file and asked her to put her name on it before it went to a municipal buyer in Dayton. She called me from the stairwell. He wants me to sign off on a model review that didn't happen, she said. Then don't. I'm not going to. What did you tell him? That I wouldn't attach my name to unsupported assumptions. I could hear voices through the stairwell door. Fast footsteps. Office shoes on concrete. Then she said, he told me I was being emotional. Of course he did. What happened next? I asked. I told him accuracy isn't an emotion. I smiled. Good. He said if I couldn't support the new direction, maybe I wasn't a fit for the transition structure. There are many ways companies try to remove competent women, suggesting they are suddenly incompatible with the future after years of carrying the present remains very popular. What did you do? I asked. I went to HR, she said. Then I went back to my desk, took my plant home, and resigned. I was quiet for a moment. Not because I was surprised. Because I knew exactly what Northcroft had just lost. Tessa was not decorative talent. She was one of the few people in that building who understood both the mechanics and the discipline behind the pricing process. If I had ever returned, she would have been central to it. Send Naomi a summary, I said. Tonight. Time, wording, who is present. I already started it. I know. She exhaled slowly. Elena. Yes. Please tell me he's finally in trouble. I looked at the screenshot of managerial intuition still sitting in my messages. Yes, I said. He is. The desperate offer came the next morning. Not from Connor. From Owen. He called at 7:11 a.m., which in corporate terms is roughly equivalent to knocking on your front door in a rainstorm and asking whether you happen to have the foundation of the house in your garage. Elena, he said, voice clipped and careful, I'd like to resolve this. I imagine you would. We're prepared to offer immediate reinstatement. Senior Director title. 210,000 base. Retention bonus. Full support. It was not a bad offer if the previous 2 weeks had not happened. But they had. I said no. There was a pause. You haven't heard the full package. I don't need the full package. His voice hardened just slightly. Elena, this company has invested heavily in the commercial framework around your work. And fired the person who understood it, I said. We need a practical solution. I let half a second pass. You're still treating ownership like a mood, I said. Silence. Then, what would make this practical? I'm not returning to sit under the man who tried to steal it, I said. That was the line. Specific. Accurate. Final. Owen did not argue. Which told me two things. First, he knew I was right. Second, the situation was already worse than his first offer reflected. He said, then have your counsel call ours. So Naomi did. The breaking point came 48 hours later when Northcroft lost not just the Stomarch bid, but the municipal renewal Tessa had refused to sign off on. Procurement delayed it pending revised pricing support, then rerouted the award elsewhere when Northcroft failed to provide a validated structure by deadline. 2 losses in 1 week. 1 private sector, 1 public sector. Different buyers, same conclusion. The board got involved directly after that. Not conversationally. Not with concern. With instructions. Naomi called me Sunday evening. They want a meeting Monday at 10. Owen. Connor. Legal. You. And Elena, she said, they are no longer negotiating from preference. Monday at 10, I walked back into Northcroft through the same lobby where I had handed over my badge 2.5 weeks earlier. No one stopped me. Reception stood up so fast she almost knocked over her pen cup. Someone near the sales corridor said, very softly, she's here. The phrase moved faster than I did. Summit was waiting. Glass walls. Long walnut table. Connor already seated. Owen standing at the far end with both hands flat on the table like he was physically keeping something from tipping over. Naomi sat beside me and set down a folder that was, in a legal sense, full of options. In a human sense, it was full of consequences. Owen started. I made a mistake, he said. Connor looked at him. Small movement. Tense jaw. No interruption. Owen continued. I allowed a leadership decision to be made without understanding the dependency structure behind a critical revenue function. That decision has cost this company time, money, client trust, and internal stability. He was looking at me when he said it. Good. I said, what do you want? I want you back, he said. In a role that matches the reality of your value. Connor shifted in his chair. Not much. Enough. Naomi opened her folder, but I spoke before she could. Then here are my terms. No one interrupted. First, I do not transfer margin map. I retain full ownership through my own entity. Northcroft receives a non-exclusive commercial license. Annual fee, $600,000, paid quarterly in advance. Connor made a noise. Not a word yet. Just disbelief with a trust fund. I kept going. Second, my role will be Executive Vice President of Pricing Strategy. reporting directly to the CEO and with standing access to board finance review when pricing or margin governance is discussed. Owen nodded once. Slow. Third, compensation. Base salary of $320,000. $80,000 signing bonus. 1% phantom equity vesting over 3 years. Separate from the software license. Connor finally spoke. That's insane. I turned to him. No, I said. Thinking you owned my work for free was insane. Silence again. Fourth, full authority over pricing systems, quote governance, model deployment, exception thresholds, and any representation made internally or externally about pricing methodology. No executive overrides. No consultant interference. No one touches process, output, or IP language without my written approval. Owen said, agreed. Fifth, Tessa Nguyen is reinstated as Director of Pricing Operations with a 30% salary increase, and Malcolm Price is moved into the Commercial Governance Group as Senior Vice President of Strategic Accounts with Pricing Escalation Authority. Both receive written apology letters. Signed. Malcolm was not formally gone, but after the previous week his future at Northcroft had become the kind of thing people discuss in hallways. I was done allowing competent adults to become collateral damage for Connor's education. Owen said, done. Connor said, why is Malcolm part of this? Because he knew enough to recognize value when he saw it, I said. That makes him useful. He opened his mouth. Closed it again. Sixth, I said, a formal report. Complete timeline of the termination, the ownership assertions, the failed rebuild attempts, the unsupported client commitments, and the losses that followed. It goes into the company record. Legal reviews it. The board sees it. No euphemisms. There it was. The condition that matters most when people are used to surviving by blur. Connor leaned forward. That's not necessary. It is. It's punitive. No, I said. It's accurate. He looked at Owen. We cannot put a document like that into the company record. It creates exposure. Naomi spoke for the first time in several minutes. The exposure already exists. Connor ignored her. We can resolve this commercially without producing a self-indicting narrative. I looked at him and thought, not for the first time, that certain men really do believe paperwork becomes unfair the moment it stops protecting them. No report, no deal, I said. Owen was very still. Connor turned to him. You can't be considering this. Owen answered without looking away from me. I'm considering the bill for not considering it. That ended that. The final term sheet took 92 minutes. I know because I watched the clock only twice. Once when Connor attempted to argue for license exclusivity and Naomi shut that down in under 30 seconds, and once when Owen signed the last page before Connor did. Connor's hand actually hesitated over the signature line. Tiny pause. Enough to notice. Then he signed. When I stood up, the room felt different than it had when I entered. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just corrected. Owen said, Can you start tomorrow? I said, I'll start at 8. He nodded. Thank you. Connor said nothing. The next morning, I came in through the same lobby again, only this time with a permanent badge, an executive title, and a license agreement worth more per year than Connor probably thought lunch break work was supposed to become. Tessa was waiting for me outside the old analytics row with a cardboard box under one arm and her desk plant under the other. You're really back, she said. Yes. She looked at the badge. Then at me. Executive Vice President. Yes. A slow grin. That's disgusting. I love it. Malcolm came over from sales 5 minutes later, coffee in hand. Senior Vice President, he said. I assume this means I now have to attend better meetings. Only the ones where people understand charts, I said. He nodded. So, different building, probably. People were relieved in layers. Sales first, because quote governance was live again by noon. Finance second, because the forecast stopped being a guessing contest by Wednesday. Legal third, because the ownership issue had moved from argument to contract. And the pricing team, what was left of it, relaxed in the very specific way overworked professionals do when the adult they trust has returned and started naming things correctly. The rebuild took 6 weeks. Not because the engine needed 6 weeks. It was already mine and fully functional. Northcroft needed 6 weeks to rebuild discipline around it. We re-established the Monday run under a controlled deployment schedule. We created a quote authority matrix that made it impossible for enthusiasm to become pricing policy. We implemented a pricing integrity register, which documented every approved adjustment, every override request, every client-specific exception, and exactly who authorized it. If someone wanted to claim ownership, strategy, or insight after that, there would be a timestamp waiting for them. The formal incident report was completed in week 3. 14 pages. Clean. Direct. No corporate cologne sprayed over any of it. Termination date. Verbal ownership assertions. Miss Stomarch bid. Riverton exposure. Unsupported municipal pricing. Tessa's resignation. The failed rebuild claim. The internal misuse of margin map outputs. The financial consequences. Connor objected to the wording twice. Lost twice. 8 months later, Northcroft was stronger than it had been before Connor decided confidence was a substitute for comprehension. Margin Map was licensed to Northcroft at $600,000 a year, paid on time every quarter. It was also licensed, in tailored versions, to 4 other distributors who had no family opinions about what lunch breaks belonged to whom. That revenue sat in my own company, separate and clean. At Northcroft, I was still Executive Vice President of Pricing Strategy. The title fit. So did the office with the door that actually closed. Tessa was thriving as Director of Pricing Operations. She ran deployment discipline with the kind of calm ferocity that makes people double-check their assumptions before bringing them to her. She also kept her plant. New pot. Better sunlight. Malcolm, as Senior Vice President of Strategic Accounts, became the bridge between pricing discipline and sales reality that the company should have built years earlier. He could translate field pressure without turning it into nonsense, which turned out to be a rare executive skill. Together, we rolled out 3 policies that changed the building permanently. First, no critical revenue system could operate without documented ownership, licensing, and continuity terms on file with legal. Second, no executive could represent a model, tool, or pricing method to the board or a client without validation from pricing governance. Third, no one, not even the CEO's family, could remove a technical owner from a live commercial process without a signed transition plan reviewed by finance, legal, and the responsible executive. That last one took very little debate. Connor Whitfield was still at Northcroft. I know. I also found that satisfying. He was Vice President of Market Initiatives now, which sounded important in the way decorative bowls look useful. He attended meetings. He asked fewer questions. He did not touch pricing. He did not describe charts. He did not use the word elasticity unless he was discussing an actual material with an engineering vendor, and even then I suspect he checked himself first. He was not destroyed, just fenced in, which, in a real company, is often the more interesting outcome. The total cost of Connor's mistake, according to the board's year-end operating review, was $8.4 million. That number included the Riverton margin loss, the Stomarch miss, the municipal account loss, legal fees, delayed contract conversions, emergency manual review labor, and remediation costs tied to rebuilding commercial governance after the termination. It did not include the annual license fee Northcroft now paid my company for access to the tool Connor thought obviously stayed there. That felt appropriate. My life got better in quieter ways. For the first time in almost a year, I ate lunch without a laptop open. That sounds small until you've spent 11 months building something between bites of yogurt because the adults with budgets kept telling you no. The first Wednesday after the rebuild stabilized, I took my lunch outside behind the building. No code, no exports, no emergency calls. Just 40 minutes and a sandwich I finished while it was still warm. My son noticed before I did. "You seem less murdery," he said one evening from the passenger seat on the way home from practice. "I have never been murdery," I said. He shrugged. "Less spreadsheet murdery then." "That," I said, "is possible." Sometimes I think back to Birch. The cold air on my left shoulder. The green light on the speakerphone. Connor sliding the packet across the table and telling me the pricing engine obviously stayed there. It did not. The reports stayed there for a while. The habits stayed there. The dependence stayed there. The consequences definitely stayed there. But the thing itself, the actual value, the structure, the judgment, the logic, I built one lunch break at a time on my own machine while Northcroft kept denying the budget. That was never his to keep just because he fired the person who made it. That was the part he never understood. If you've ever been underestimated at work, I hope this story reminds you that quiet preparation always beats loud arrogance. If this resonated, like and subscribe. I share stories like this every week. And remember, just because they used what you built every Monday doesn't mean they owned what you built on your lunch break.